Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekly reading report. It's time for my weekly reading report, that fantastic show where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the past week, or in this case, the past week and a half, or 2 weeks, or whatever it's been. I can't remember, Roger, when the last time was that I did this show. But here I am doing it again. So let's just pick up where I left off. Where was that? Okay, I have my list here for the 500 book challenge. The challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. And I left off with book 286. So let's start there. Book 286, which was this book. This is Adventures of Superman, Volume 1, which was an anthology series from 2013. And it was pretty good. It's an anthology series with different writers and artists doing different Superman stories. And so, like a lot of anthology series, some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But mostly it's pretty good. I liked it. And it must have seemed great back in 2013 when the only Superman around in comic books was the New 52 Superman. Here, at least, we got the genuine article. And yeah, so this is Adventures of Superman, Volume 1. I'm not sure if there's a Volume 2. I don't have it if it exists. But Volume 1, pretty good. Adventures of Superman. I like this. This was book 286. Now, I read this because I read Superman every day of my life. So I've been continuing to read Superman every day. And what I'm reading right now is this book. This is Superman, The Exile and Other Stories Omnibus, which has stories from 1988 and up through 1989, maybe a little further, I can't remember. But these stories take place in the late 80s after John Byrne left the book, after John Byrne's run. John Byrne, of course, came to DC Comics in 1986 and rebooted the Superman saga. He started from scratch. He got rid of a bunch of Superman's mythology. No more Supergirl. Even a bigger crime was he got rid of Krypto the Superdog, which seems insane. No longer was Superman Superboy when he was a kid. Now he became Superman when he was an adult, just like the movie from the Christopher Reeve movie. Actually, John Byrne's Man of Steel, which is the miniseries that kicked off his run, felt a lot like a version closer to the films than the comic books that had come out to that point. It worked, though. John Byrne's Superman series worked because I was a Marvel kid and I moved over to DC to continue to read John Byrne comics. And I picked up Superman and really, really liked it. And I've been a Superman fan ever since. So it worked. But John Byrne didn't stick around too long. And when he left, right before he left, he did kind of a terrible thing. He had Superman in a Superman story kill some supervillains, which Superman does not do. But in this story, Superman goes to an alternate world where these 3 Kryptonians, led by General Zod, of course, massacred and destroyed like everybody on the planet. And Superman was afraid that they'd go to his world in his universe. And so he executed them with kryptonite. He just killed them, which is something Superman would not do. He would put them in the Phantom Zone. Sure, he would do that, but now here John Byrne says, I think I'll just kill him. And then I'll leave the book and leave whoever picks up after me to deal with it. And so that's what he did. And this series of stories takes place after that. And Superman has to deal with the personal repercussions of killing people when he is a guy who absolutely will not kill people. So yeah, John Byrne left Jerry Ordway and Roger Stern holding the bag on that one. But this series of comics this is when Superman started to get really, really good for a while. Superman was really good at this point and into the 1990s. And this omnibus is excellent. Jerry Ordway, for one thing, is a great Superman artist. He's just a great comic book artist. And in this series of stories, he proves that he is also a really good writer. So, yeah, excellent so far. Superman, The Exile, and Other Stories. I'll probably be reading this one a while because it's very, very large. So there's that. Let's move on to book 287. So book 287 is some more comics, lucky you. That was this one, because as well as reading Superman, I am reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four, which ran from 1961, I think, 61 or 62, up until 1996, when it was canceled and brought right back. And these stories in this book, this is the 20th Fantastic Four Epic Collection. This has stories from 1989 to 1990. And these stories are pretty good. These stories are really good, actually. They're written by Walter Simonson, and there's also some artwork by Walter Simonson in it. And it's as good as most Walter Simonson artwork is. And the stories are really good. And it ends with Days of Future Present, which is a 4-part story, which is kind of a team up between the X-Men, X-Factor, and X-Men. And it ran through the different annuals, and it was okay. It started off good. It sagged a little bit in the middle, but the last part was really, really good because Arthur Adams took over the artwork. And Arthur Adams is an absolutely fantastic artist, and he blows everybody else away who was working on this story. So it ended really well. The story itself was okay about Reed Richards and Sue Richards' child, Franklin, from the future, who comes back in time, a version of the future anyway. And it's a decent enough story. But like I said, it's one of the problems when you have kind of a crossover type story written by different people and drawn by different people. They tend to be uneven, and that's the way this story was. It started off good, okay, couple saggy middle points, which are like where the story kind of repeated itself. And then a really good conclusion written by Chris Claremont, who really should have written the whole thing. And I don't think he did. I can't remember who the other writers were. But yeah, Chris Claremont did a good job. Yeah, there were other... Yeah, Louise Simonson wrote one of them. And she's a good writer, but for this story, But mostly this epic collection was excellent, and now I moved on to the new Fantastic Four, which is the next epic collection 21, which has stories from 1990 to 1992. So we're into the final decade of the original run of the Fantastic Four. There's only, I think, 5 more, including this one, 5 more epic collections worth of comics. And then I'll be done with the first run of the Fantastic Four. And from what I remember, the Fantastic Four comics of the 1990s were actually pretty good. There was really no reason to cancel this series. It was pretty good the way it was, but you know how it is with comics. And we have another more Arthur Adams work. That's a great cover because the first story, The New Fantastic Four, which is the title of the epic collection, is a story about how the Fantastic Four seemingly die. It's all the work of an evil Skrull. And a new Fantastic Four has to be recruited. And the new Fantastic Four is the Hulk, Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, and Wolverine. So a lot of Marvel's really popular characters at the time. And it's fun. It's a tremendously fun story. Adams does a fantastic job illustrating it. And so that's the opening story of this. So this has been pretty cool. So yeah, 287, Fantastic Four, Into the Time Stream was the name of that epic collection. Which brings me to book 288, Borak and Other Desert Adventures. So I talked about the character Borak the other day when I did the Robert E. Howard show a couple days ago. So this is Borak and Other Desert Adventures by Robert E. Howard. Borak, fantastic character, who I talked all about in my last video. But the book itself, which is published by Del Rey, is part of Del Rey's series of Robert E. Howard books. It was the second to last volume published, I believe, if I'm remembering right, in that series. And it's just fantastic. These adventure stories are great. This not only has the Borak stories, it also has the 3 Kirby O'Donnell stories, another adventurer who adventured in the Middle East, who is quite different than Borak, actually. And it also has a final story in here. The final story is The Fire of Ashurbanipal, which is an adventure story that didn't sell. So Robert E. Howard actually turned it into a supernatural story. He added a supernatural element to the story, and it was eventually, I think, published in Weird Tales. And the supernatural version of the story is actually, I think, better. But this version is pretty good, too. They're both good. And it's a fantastic book. I loved it. It did take a while for me to read just because I was so busy the last couple weeks. And it's, it's a 550-page book, but it's great. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. So, yeah, every page, I should say. I loved every page of Borak and Other Desert Adventures. It was fantastic. So I read that. That was book 288. And now I'm reading 289. Now, for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, I am reading The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, written and illustrated by Howard Pyle, which I read once before when I was a little kid. My stepfather had a hardcover copy of this book, and I took it and I read it, and it was wonderful. And so I haven't read it since I was a little kid, and it's just as good as it was when I was a little kid. It's fantastic. This book, I'm not too far into it, but it's such a wonderful, wonderful read. It's got these fantastic illustrations by Howard Pyle. And this edition of it, there are a few different editions of this out there. This edition of it from Dover has all of the illustrations and decorations that Howard Pyle did for this story. Howard Pyle basically took a bunch of legends and ballads about Robin Hood, and he put them all together and made a novel out of all of those stories and songs from the Middle Ages, which, as far as I'm aware, had not been done before. And he added a bunch of stuff. He was a wonderful storyteller, Howard Pyle. So, of course, he added a bunch of his own stuff when he was putting this story together, which have since become part of the Robin Hood legend. There were a bunch of Robin Hood books that came after this, and Robin Hood films that came after this that used elements that were invented by Howard Pyle for this book. And it's a wonderful story. It's just complete, total escapism. It's exactly what it needs to be. Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. And yeah, he did a bunch of other books as well, Howard Pyle. He did books about King Arthur and some other books. This is the easiest one to find, although the King Arthur book is still being published as well. You can find, I think, most of Howard Pyle's, if not all of Howard Pyle's books on Project Gutenberg, I think. There are a lot of ebook copies floating around. A lot of them have the original illustrations, but from some of the ones that I've seen, they haven't always been reproduced that well. I guess it depends on what device you're reading on. But it's wonderful to read it in a physical copy because you got the full-sized illustrations. all in the proper places, and it's wonderful. I highly recommend this book. Haven't finished it yet, but it should be finished by the time I see you next time, and I'll talk more about it then. But yeah, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. It's fantastic. I did get a couple things in the mail. The two types of things that are excluded from the 500 book challenge are Marvel Epic Collections, because I collect those, and DC Finest volumes, which are basically DC's versions of Epic Collections. And so I get those every week. And so this week, for those, I got Micronauts, the original Marvel Years Volume 2. Micronauts were toys. Marvel Comics has a really good track record of making comic books based on toys. And the Micronauts were pretty cool. It was a pretty cool comic book. And this is Volume 2. There was a Micronauts omnibus, and so basically they split the first Micronaut omnibus in two, I think, and we have 2 Epic collections so far. And hopefully the series will continue all throughout the original to publish all of the original Micronauts comics. So these are comics from 1980 and 1981, and I really liked them. I didn't like them as much as Rom, because Rom is awesome, Roger. I don't care what you say. Rom is awesome. But I enjoyed the Micronauts as well. So yeah, Micronauts. I got that for Marvel's Epic Collections. I also got a DC Finest volume, and it's a wonderful DC Finest volume. This is Horror, The Devil's Doorway. So in the DC Finest, they're not only doing comics on their major superheroes, but they also have different genre books that are coming out. And so in this volume, their horror volume, this has stories from 1969 to 1970. So this has, what's in here? House of Secrets, issues 81 to 85. House of Mystery, 180 to 185. The Witching Hour, issues 3 to 7. The Unexpected, issues 113 to 117. And a story from The Phantom Stranger, number 5. And it has a lot of awesome comics. I used to pick these comic books up when I was a little kid. And most of the comics that I picked up were back issues. So I was picking up old issues of House of Mystery and House of Secrets. And I never got any issues of The Witching Hour. I guess I never found any of those. But I really enjoyed these comics. These are very, very tame horror comics. They were still nervous, DC, at this time, because of all the nonsense that happened in the 1950s with the horror comics from EC, who did the best horror comics ever made. These comics are a lot tamer than that, and they signaled that with some of their covers. So you always have little children that were menaced on the covers of the House of Mystery and House of Secrets, which I'm not sure, that makes it actually a little more disturbing. But they always had little children on the covers of these early issues of House of Mystery and House of Secrets. I guess to signal that, these are fine for kids, these comics. And like I said, they're pretty tame. This is pretty tame stuff. But the writers, you have to give them credit for imagination, because these are very imaginative stories and they're fun. They're not, like I said, there's nothing frightening in any of these stories, but they do show a decent amount of imagination. They're really fun. There's some great artwork in here. And so I do highly recommend these comics. These were great comics. I loved them when I was a kid, and I'd pick them up whenever I could find them. So there's a big nostalgia factor in this for me, because I actually have some of these original issues, which I picked up like wherever I could. Wherever I could pick them up when I was a kid. I traded for them. I traded other comics for these comics. But yeah, this is good stuff. So I'm really happy this one came out. And there's going to be other genre volumes coming out from DC Finest. There's going to be a war volume coming out. There's going to be a Western volume coming out. So I'm looking forward to all of those. But this one is a good one. So yeah, DC Finest, Horror, The Devil's Doorway. That's cool. I think that's everything for this week. I think I covered everything. I will catch you next time.